just like honey, sweet to taste on burning lips. Wanna lie beneath the water, feeling icy fingertips. Soothing nectar to my body, wash the embers from my eyes. Dirty streets of hungry people, drink the water, dry your eyes. First one look at the reflections, listen to the music made. Drinking water's ease the mind, thoughts of you begin to fade. Just like honey, sweet to taste on burning lips. Wanna lie beneath the water, feeling icy fingertips. Soothing nectar to my body, wash the embers from my eyes. Dirty streets of hungry people, drink the water, dry your eyes. First one look at the reflections, listen to the music made. Drinking water's ease the mind, thoughts of you begin to fade. Get yourself together before it's too late. That worked. It's my phone again. Good evening, everybody. It's Saturday, this 26th of February. And do I hear a sigh in the background? Ooh, that can only be one person.
Oh, God.
Give that guy an enema, for Christ's sake. But it's Saturday at 9:13 Eastern Standard Time. And I'll tell you, the world's for shit right now, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? And it is really wonderful to see you, but it seems like every week things get worse. And since we last spoke, Russia invaded and all hell's broken loose in Eastern Europe. And who knows what. And this brings me to our guest tonight. And of course, our guest is my good friend Guy Lane, who is an author and an activist from Brisbane, Australia. If you don't know who he is, he's been on our show before when I was with Head in the Box. He was there too, several interviews. The ironic thing is most of the time we interview him, something is really fucked up with the world, and it's either a pandemic or it's an election, and the Russia this and that. It just seems to never fail. So I don't know if it's your fault, Guy, or not. But in any case, Guy's our guest, and as well as Guy, we're going to have Dave in a few minutes too. So, Guy, welcome to a 1950s living room. How are you?
I'm well, very well indeed.
Well, it's wonderful to see you, and apparently we are live from Brisbane, Australia, at Hotel Prius or Motel Prius.
Motel Prius.
It's a little too small to be a hotel, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Doesn't have a ballroom.
Now, it seems to me, I don't know, are you on the beach right now?
I am parked in a car park that overlooks Moreton Bay. So I've got Moreton Bay ahead of me, and I've got the Scarborough Marina behind me. And this is the only dry ground in about 200 square miles at the moment.
And that is ironic because, at least, personally speaking, from my perspective, I kept thinking about the wildfires a couple of years ago in Australia, and the place was on fire. And now, I don't know what the hell happened down there.
Well, it's like that. It's like the extremes. It's such a big continent, and when you get weather systems set in, sometimes they set in for a while and they get intense one way or they get intense the other way. We've had a few of these big wets over there was a big one in 2011, actually, a big flood event like this. Normally they're associated with cyclones, the tail end of cyclones that come south. This one's not cyclonic inspired. It's just another big.
Do you think there's any? Again, I'm just speculating, but I as much as I've been following the Russian thing for the last week or two, I did read that Antarctica has had a problem because they've had the greatest ice melt ever, at least as far as I know, in incredible history as far as around the coasts.
I haven't followed up,
but
I don't know whether that's affecting this at all. But obviously, the Thwaites Glacier has been in the news quite a lot recently after a whole bunch of new science has come out on that, which is a massive glacier which is basically starting to fall apart.
Well, let's hope it doesn't drop. Or some people may want it to drop because the way things are going now, anything might be better, might ease the pain, so to speak. So, Guy, I'm going to bring Dave in here. You, of course, know Dave, and Dave knows you. So, Dave, do you have your audio working somewhat tonight? We're good?
Okay. That was one of the worst songs I ever heard.
Don't
in that
ever
intro.
cut Alan Holdsworth up. Forget it. Don't even start.
No, hold on.
He did that on purpose, Guy. He did that. He knows I revere Alan Holdsworth, and he did that on purpose.
Here's the thing.
Thanks, Dave.
Not only did you play it once, you repeated it. So I want to go on record, Guy, since you're here. Brian, the only thing worse than your technical ability to run Divided We Stand is basically your musical taste. And also, I know from personal experience, your geography isn't very strong. So, do you have any idea where Australia even is?
It's south of you. Yes, I
Yeah,
do know
but
where
so's
Australia
so's
is.
so's North
Did I
Carolina.
say
But it's not the same
Austria?
place.
No, no, no. I look. That was just scenery from North Carolina. Okay, I do know the difference between the
That was
terrain.
North Carolina.
Yeah, that was North Carolina. But Dave, you and Guy have something in common. I mean, at least some of your
Well,
blood was living there, right?
yeah.
He
Since
got
I
out.
don't even know if I've talked to Guy since then. Yeah, our son, daughter-in-law, and my two grandchildren spent 2 years there. Uh, Michael was on a project with the university, and when it came time to come back to America, three of the four did not want to come back. So I guess that's really a pretty great endorsement of Australia. In fact, as recently as yesterday, my granddaughter called and said, "Grandpa, would you go back to Australia with me if I go?" And I said, "Well, sure. Anything's better in America right now."
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
Joking about it, but seriously, I do want to pay, since you're on and you're representing your country tonight, your school system makes ours honestly look like an old one-room schoolhouse, very advanced. Now, I can't speak to the university system, but really great projects, ideas. The thing that I like best was, my granddaughter is going to be a radical, I hope, a little bit a rebel, is they encourage that. A lot of their lessons, she was able to leave school a couple of times to engage in environmental protests. In America, of course, we don't believe in climate change because it's not real. If you asked our former president, it's coming out of China or somewhere. I don't know. But enough on that. But really, seriously, I can't wait to get there. Uh, haven't been able to get in. Now suddenly you're back open. So
Yeah,
my
Doesn't look like
son
you're
will be
getting in
going there.
anytime soon. The way it looked there, unless you have
Well,
a
my
surfboard.
son will be going back 3 or 4 times a year. One time he could take his family. So I asked if that included me. He said absolutely not. But I think I could probably stow away on the plane and get there.
So, Guy, what is up with you since we've last spoken?
Well, most of my attention has been on a project called Vita. I don't know whether I spoke to you about Vita
We did
before.
talk a little bit about Vita, but you just started it.
Yeah. So Vita is now quite mature, and we're at the phase now where we are looking for, and we've been offered a substantial chunk of funding to basically operationalize the idea. And Vita, at the heart of Vita, is the question: why is it that Western people are so accommodating of political and economic systems that are destroying our life support system on the planet? And what I came to understand about 5 years ago was there's something missing in the Western spirituality. There is a spiritual disconnect between Western people and nature. And so I've been working to create a brand, if you like, around that, and actually created a body of writing, which is the Vita spiritual philosophy, which basically tries to bring a spiritual philosophy into existence that is absolutely suited to our times, that it addresses the Anthropocene, it addresses transition and so forth. And around that, there's a brand, that there is a whole bunch of symbols which can be turned into jewelry, such as this thing that I'm wearing around my neck right now. And there's a whole bunch of ideas, including environmental education platforms. And what we're really trying to do is to sort of bring together three things, which is to help people adopt a nature-based spirituality, to advise them on reality and environmental sciences, and to foster pro-environmental behavioral change. And we believe that there are around 53 million people in the Western world that would identify with this spiritual philosophy once we can put it in front of them. And that's what the funding is going to help us do.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you know, everything seems to be going for shit in this world, and you've always been concerned about the environment, and you've taken it to a spiritual level, and I could understand that because, and I've said this before, as you know, I'm an atheist. But you can at least see nature. You know what I mean? You can identify with it. The sun comes up
Yeah.
every day. We know how important it
Yeah.
is. So in a certain
Yeah.
sense, and I don't want to get
Yeah.
because I'm not a spiritual guy, but in a certain sense, it should be a spiritual thing if there were a thing called spirituality, because it's something that we can identify with, and we came from it. We didn't come from strings down. We came from the earth up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we evolved on this planet over 3.8 billion years, and so we have an innate spiritual connection to nature. Whatever spirituality is, it's connected to nature because that's where we came from. But as soon as we start listening to Western culture, learning Western culture as children, we lose that connection to nature, and instead we've got this idea of God and everlasting life and all of these abstractions and consumerism and all of the distractions that are distracting us from the fact that we are innately connected to our living planet, not only spiritually but physically. We're breathing in oxygen produced by plants. We're pushing out pushing out carbon dioxide, which is absorbed by plants. We're effectively a subset of the biosphere, and when we see ourselves that way, when we see ourselves as a part of the biosphere as opposed to apart from the biosphere, then it changes the way that we act with relation to it. And I just can't imagine that if people that were spiritually connected to nature wouldn't be making nuclear bombs,
Right.
right? So it's almost like there's something fundamentally wrong with our spirituality that allows us as a society to manufacture devices that can annihilate life on Earth. And that's what Vita's an inquiry into that and looking to frame that and understand that. And it's not been done. So there's nothing like Vita. I've just shared the link. I don't know whether you can see that there. I've shared it on the messenger.
I will. A
Think
messenger in
Vita.org.
Facebook, guy.
No, that's on your, what's this,
Okay, then
Ecamm?
I
I just
will.
get it.
I'll search for that. I've been kind of behind in the comments, so
It went into comments or guest chat? Guest chat. Oh,
I'm looking.
I put it on guest chat. Anyway, it's thinkvita.org. That's what I wanted to say. I don't know whether you can bring that up. That's the website address.
I think I might have it here. Somebody might have sent it.
It's on the thing called guest chat.
Oh,
Chat
yes.
private.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I know what you're talking about. Hold on for a sec. That I can do. Hold on.
All right. While you're doing that, I'll just explain some more. So, Vita is now a registered charity. Technically, it's a registered religious institution. So, technically, what we've done is we've administratively created a new religion, and that in itself is actually very significant, because if you look at new religions over the last 20, 30 years, there's only really been two or three, one of which is the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, and this thing registered in Sweden called the International Church of Copyism, which is devoted to file sharing. I shit you not. So that's significant, but we don't promote Vita. It's administratively and technically a registered religious institution, but when we go out and speak to people, we talk to them about the spiritual aspects, not the religious aspects, if you like. So it's like it's like a new brand that contains a spiritual philosophy, a packet of environmental science, directions for right action, jewelry, and a whole bunch of other things. And we've got accepted as an observer at a big UN conference in China later this year in July. It's called the Convention for Biological Diversity. The CBD is the sister organization of the UNFCCC, which is the UN's climate change body. And where the UNFCCC had the Paris Agreement in 2015, what's happening in China is the equivalent. It's like the Paris Agreement of biodiversity, and it's called the Kunming Declaration. And we've been accepted as observers, and the budget that we're hoping to get our hands on will have us go to China for 2 weeks at this big UN conference, where they're going to sign off basically on a global compact to protect nature. Mm-hmm. And that's where we want to do a global launch of Vita.
Now, you mentioned the funding. I don't want to get too deep, but are these Australian, or is this all over the world, the funding?
We've got a number of conversations going in Australia, and we're just trying to just nurture things along to actually get the money in the tin so that we can execute on our plans. We've got a budget drawn up for the first 12 months. That includes going over to London for the Extinction Rebellion action that's planned there in April to be witnesses, but also to share the idea of Vita, because those actions are basically, we have a concept called latent Vitans. So we're basically, latent Vitans are people that would accept Vita, they just haven't come across it yet. And all we've really done is just put a name to a class of people who are spiritually connected to nature, taking right action for the environment and advised by reality and environmental sciences. Right. I mean, that little package of 3 things is what we refer to as a Vetan. So we just put a name to it, and we just want to sort of put some structure around it, where so there's sort of like power in numbers. You know, there's and Vita as a spiritual philosophy is designed and properly worded so that Christians can be, I know Christian Vetans and atheist Vetans. So I'm an atheist Vetan, for example, right? So Vita doesn't.
I think
there's
you should
no
clarify that
Vita
for our audience, because you are an atheist. It just happens that you're somebody who has a concept of spiritual.
Okay, so my personal belief is that there is no God. But as a Vetan, I'm somebody who has a deep reverence for nature, for the biosphere, for we call it Vitae Planeta, right? So otherwise known as like Gaia or Pachamama, right? So I have a deep affection and reverence for the natural systems on our planet, and I don't believe that there is a God. So that makes me an atheist Vetan. Now, there are people, I met a guy recently down in Bellingen who's got a PhD in forest governance and who has a deep reverence for nature as well, who's also a Christian. Okay. And so Vita is designed to be complementary. It sort of adds a sustainability plug-in to mainstream religion, if you know what I mean. Because the part of the reason we've got an ecological crisis is that Western spiritualities, whether it's the mainstream religions or the New Age religions that we've adopted, like, you know, crystals and tarot and all these things, there's nothing in that space of spirituality in Western world that actually talks to climate change or ecological collapse.
Well, not only that, Dave and I have discussed this. You have to excuse me for interrupting, Guy, but I'll forget if I don't say it. We have talked about the Judeo-Christian philosophy about nature, and it was always dominion over the earth. And essentially, that, at least I think Dave and I agree, that's what got us in trouble in the first place, because we're dominating over these animals and actually torturing them. It was unsustainable.
Yeah, and not only is it as you say, but there is precious little written in, for example, the Bible about nature, and you know, it was written by an agrarian society who who most of their ways of seeing the world related to agriculture. Okay, and agriculture, by its definition, replaces the ecosystem. You've got to cut down something in order to plant a field. It doesn't grow naturally. And I think this is really at the very heart of why we've got this ecological crisis, is because we don't have a language to describe it in spiritual terms, and spiritual is one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. And so, I appreciate you're saying that you're not a spiritual person, but I think we all have it to a certain degree. I mean, I think it's innate in us as humans, and for some people it's really abundant, and for other people it's not really explored necessarily or particularly important. All we're trying to say is that to the extent that we have a spirituality, we need to have a core part of that directed towards the interests of nature, and that's what Vita is trying to promote.
Mm-hmm. Dave, do you want to?
Well, sure. Extremely impressed with what got said, but as a great American, I can't accept it. Because, Guy, you didn't address the 3 things that are the most important about American Christianity, and that's money, guns, and the hate of the other. This sounds like this is going to be something that, well, as you pointed out, anybody can get along with, and can kind of fit in. And I don't get this idea of saving the earth, because that doesn't have anything to do with money, guns, or the hatred of others. which is the
Yeah.
American Christian Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Now,
how do
I
you
have,
get
now I have
around
a
that?
serious question.
Yeah.
You gave me something
Yeah,
to think
yeah.
about, and this is what I'm thinking about. You mentioned it, of course, we're in the technological revolution now, but we came through the industrial, and the West was far more industrialized than the East initially. And I wonder how much that idea, that link of, industry, that Victorian idea that, humans are perfectible by really money. Just this idea, if somehow we'd skip that, would we have a more, well, we're going to end up killing ourselves if we don't get back, or if we never had and don't put one in place, some kind of reverence for nature. And the other thing that I think is so telling in the way you said it, and I think a lot of people wouldn't link this up. Yeah, you said tonight around the world, many, 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 many people are worried about nuclear again, right? It's a possibility. It's probably not going to happen,
Well, it
but it's certainly on the
makes a
table.
difference now because that's what essentially Putin is threatening. So now you've got
Well,
this back again, you know.
But what I find so interesting about that is what you said. I don't think a lot of people grasp that. If you had a more reverent idea about this planet, which is our home, I also am opposed to organized religion myself. Somebody else wants to have it, that's fine. Don't put your beliefs on everyone else, and certainly don't mess up the world by saying God will take care of it. It's not going to work that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the idea, just a question to you. I mean, yes, the Western world. Have you or the group have done any more research on why it's the West? I mean, my limited knowledge, Eastern philosophy, whether it's Zen, Buddhism, Shinto, a lot of those things are closer to nature. We had the Native American, one with nature. If you harm a mountain, you're harming your family for generations to come. So how did all that come out to play in the West?
Well, I mean, judo. So prior to the spread of Christianity, the main spiritual expression in Europe was paganism and worship of nature. Okay, and then Christianity came in and basically referred to them as heathens and killed them or converted them or whatever, to a belief that there was actually some supreme being that you should pay attention to. And in so doing, it sort of opened up the access that you can then go and cut down the forest, because people that aren't spiritually connected to something not particularly fussed when it gets destroyed. Okay, and so what Vita is trying to do is to try and be the really modern version of pagan belief or traditional First Nation belief, but it's the westernized version of that same sentiment. Okay.
It just strikes me as odd too. I'm sorry. The word pagan itself, right? For so many people, oh my God, that's a sin.
Yeah.
But if you do look at the people that were labeled pagans, they might have been, or probably were, in my estimate, more spiritual, not only to nature, but some other things. And the other thing I find interesting about Christianity is they stole some of the ideas, Christmas, and this, and then turned that around and perverted them. One last question on this. It sounds like it's going to be a very accepting, your group. Now, will you accept Brian? And the reason I ask that is I make it a point never to belong to a group that would accept Brian. And I really think you're on to something. So could you just kind of pretend that you let Brian in and keep him out? Would that be, or would that be big hypocritical? I don't know.
No, we'll call him an honourary Vetan until you guys have said it.
Well, it sounds
I
like
say the same thing,
and I really like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Can you actually share the screen to show that the website, Brian, just so we can have it up for a second?
Yep, absolutely. Let me.
It's thinkvita.org is the web address.
Yeah, let me do that.
Repeat that again for everybody while Brian's.
thinkvita.org. Thinkvita.org.
Right.
Be
I
there
just
in a
want to
second,
show off
guy.
the graphics. Yeah.
Right. 1 second, and I'll be there.
While Brian's doing that, and I'll shut up when the thing comes on. There it is.
Now let me put,
All right.
if you don't mind, Guy, I'm going to put a camera on you here so that you can explain it.
Okay, good. Do that.
Let me just get this up top here.
One
Okay,
other
so one of
thing,
the-
Guy. Go ahead.
Uh,
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
You just scroll down a little bit there.
Yeah,
Except
1
for
second. I'm
cookies.
just going to try to get the picture again in here. I don't. Camera overlay. Guy. All right. Let me.
Oh, here we go. Good stuff. Great. Look at that.
All right. Now you want me to scroll up a little?
Yeah, just accept the cookies there on the right.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. So so this is some of our symbolism. The round symbol with the little eyes there. We call that the Verda. One of the concepts in Veda is this concept called the Verdant Age. So if you were to just up in the top menu there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Verdant
just
Age?
actually just above my head, the Verdant Age. Click on that. Yeah. So the Verdant Age is this idea that if we can get through the Anthropocene crisis, that we can and find a way to live in balance with nature, we could conceivably be on this planet for tens of millions of years. And the diagrams you can see there, the diagram on the left comes out of a science paper called Trajectories of the Earth System in the Anthropocene. I won't go into it in detail, but basically it's saying that over the last 1.2 million years, the planet has been within a certain temperature range and a certain level of sea level range, and that we're now beyond that. We've gone out of that cycle, which is like the red line going up on the diagonal, and that if we continue to burn fossil fuels and trigger the cascade of climate tipping points, then potentially the planet could race away up to 6 or 8 degrees above baseline temperatures, which would effectively rerun the Permian extinction. So, the annihilation of most life on Earth. And somewhere between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius, according to that science paper, are the cascade of climate tipping points. So we're already 1.2 degrees above baseline now. So we're in like literally a climate emergency. And what their model shows in there is that we've got the capacity, if we can get off fossil fuels and pull carbon out the atmosphere quick enough, we can conceivably stabilize the Earth at this temperatures and sea level slightly higher than it's been in the past, but preventing us from going into this runaway. And that's and they refer to that as stabilized Earth, or the stewardship of the whole Earth system. And we refer to that as the Verdant Age. So if we can get through this crisis and actually find a way to live in balance with nature, we conceivably be on the planet for tens or hundreds of millions of years. The planet will be habitable for life for another 2 billion years or so, beyond which time the sun will burn up. So we can potentially occupy a good chunk of that. And so that's sort of the aspiration. And if you think about an aspiration that the Christians might have, which is to die and go to heaven, that's a little bit boring compared to an aspiration to actually stay on this beautiful planet for another 50 to 100 million years.
Right.
And that's an idea. Now people say, oh, look, people can't think that far ahead. I'm not asking them to think 500 million years ahead. I'm just asking them to think about what they can do to create the conditions that allow us to have that opportunity.
Right, and given that amount of time, who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, I've said myself, Guy, that if we hadn't gone through the Dark Ages and the libraries of Alexandria and whatnot, we probably would have had computers somewhere around, the Revolutionary War, or perhaps even when Lincoln was president. And so, I mean, I don't know if that's where you're getting it. Where, in a certain sense, why would you want to go to heaven? Because we could create something through the natural process of progress.
Yeah. And look, this planet is perfect for us. We evolved here. It's not like there's some other place. This whole idea of going to Mars, I mean, it's just madness. It's got 0.38 gravity. You're 6 months in space. You urinate your fucking bones out, but when you get there, because your body sheds the calcium because there's no like, it's just insanity. This is the only planet for us, right? Now, conceivably, a billion years from now, the humans are still going strong on Earth, but the sun's getting too hot. Then, so maybe we can conceivably settle other planets, but, to keep the human race going for an extra period of time. But to try and do that now is adding an extra burden on the planet. I mean, look at all the materials that are going into these insane, ideas of putting, space tourism and trips to Mars and moon tourism. It's, this is exactly the wrong time in human history to be investing time and effort and engineering talent into those things. We need to stabilize the patient first, and then once the planet's looked after, then we can think about doing trips to Mars.
Now, this I don't mean this in any kind of negative way, Guy, but David and I have, I guess, since the 2 years we've been on here at Divided We Stand, which makes it different than Head in the Box. Because, I go back to 2005 doing videos about ice melt and things like that. But we've come to the conclusion, at least on this channel, that the far left, and not just the environmentalists, but just the far left, it seems to me doesn't understand that there has to be some kind of political solution to get to where we're getting. I mean, I get it, where Extinction Rebellion is they're protesting in London, and you've got Occupy Democrats, you've got all these kind of things happening. Great, or Occupy Wall Street, I should say, something like that. We have Occupy Democrats too, but forward movement by countries in terms of Paris Accords, going much further than that, it seems like can only be done through political discourse, because Putin's not going to listen to us, and it's hard enough to get, Trump's not going to listen to us, and your neighbor down the street here in the United States is not going to listen to us, and I'm sure you have that same problem in Australia. I don't know if we can sell this idea. So how do you get beyond the politics first to be able to deal with these problems and say, hey, we're in trouble here, and we can't keep talking about it?
Yeah, look, we're in a terrible bind. I mean, a big part of the problem is that over 60% of the world's energy is provided through fossil fuels still to this day, and that the fossil fuel industry has got this vast cash reserves and this 100-200-year-old institutional means by which to create government policy that suits its own interests. And despite this massive build out of renewable energy technology over the last decade or so, which has been absolutely phenomenal, it's only just been able to keep track with the growth in demand for electricity or with the energy, because the global economy continues to grow. So we're sort of at this point now where something's got to give. And what's giving is that fossil fuels are much more expensive compared to renewables now. So the cheapest energy you can now get comes from solar PV and offshore wind farms, or onshore wind farms, offshore wind farms. So we got this situation in Australia right now where we've got a tech billionaire called Mike Cannon-Brookes, who's behind a company called Atlassian. He's worth like 18 billion or something. And he is proposing to buy Australia's largest energy company called AGL with the intention of winding up its fossil fuel plants, right? Now, he's not going to get the permission from the government to make that purchase, because the government is in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. And so what we're actually seeing is that in terms of economics, renewables are winning hands down, but it's the rearguard action of the politicians,
like the Joe Manchins of the world in West Virginia here.
Yeah, exactly, that are holding it back. Now, at some point, it's just not going to be tenable to continue to spend billions of dollars or to force extra cost onto the public. Eventually, that word's going to get out, and you won't be able to find politicians that can do that. And then there'll just be this massive build out of renewables, which comes with problems itself, right? So, you've got to use a lot of energy to build a multi-megawatt wind turbine, and that energy's got to come from somewhere. and there's a lot of minerals go into it. And there's evidence now that these offshore wind farms, they're shedding large amounts of fiberglass material into the ocean. But this is early stages of this technology. Steam engines have been around for 200 years, whereas modern wind turbines, we've had like about 20 years or so of like really high tech investment into them. This early stages. There's now a firm in Europe who are able to recycle wind turbine blades. This has always been a big problem with the blades, is that they're really massive and you can't do anything with them. I was involved in a project years ago in North Queensland where they had a dozen wind turbines and they were going to change the blades for a more efficient design. And they let this contract to basically shred the old blades and put them into a landfill. And I intervened trying to get one of the blades to use it as a display at a school. And the company just rejected the offer. So what I'm saying is that, we're in this sort of transitional phase that's the end of the fossil fuel industry and the rise of the sustainable renewable energy industry. And it's this part of the game where it's really gritty and messy and violent, and I think this business with Russia, Russia's 60 or 80% of the Russian economy is based around fossil fuels.
Correct.
And the world wants to turn off fossil fuels over the next 50 years. You can sort of see how they're freaking out about their future, so this is just a part of this journey. Now, if we can get this journey right, if we can have the weight of the people move towards doing the right thing as opposed to them doing the wrong thing, there's a chance we could actually get through this mess with some ecosystem integrity remaining, that we can then build a new society. What we know is that if you stop chopping the forests grow back quickly. Okay, nature basically, there's a concept called rewilding, which is if you just leave the field alone, just don't go into the field, just leave it will eventually grow into something beautiful. Nature is constantly trying to grow, and what we're doing now is constantly smacking it back and destroying it. If we just take a breath and stop exploiting it, it will grow back, and in so doing suck out billions of tons of carbon, because as nature grows, it's based on green plants, green cells, photosynthesis, So but where we are at the moment is we're stuck with these sort of two powerful forces: the fear of transition, and it's just the incapability of modern political systems to actually change anything. It seems like what governments are supposed to do is to be the agents to maintain the status quo, because the status quo works for the power elite and the wealthy, and they don't want it to change. They certainly don't want to have to close down their industries, which is generating the great wealth. So this is the dilemma. This is what we call the sustainability problematique, the interconnected set of problems which are holding us back from change that we need to do in order to be able to stay on this planet for longer.
Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, a few things. Something I've been really working on for a while, which I think is running parallel to this, if not intersecting points. And I speak for only to America because that's what I know best. So I kind of leave the world to other people. And I think one of the things we've lost here, maybe we never had it to any degree, but we certainly don't have it now, is this concept of common good, right? There's too much individuality, epitomized by the pathetic non-human who somehow found his way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for 4 years. And while he's, might be at the top of the deplorable chart, he's not the only person that we have there. So I think what you're striving for, and we should all be striving for, is a kind of a respect for nature as more powerful, really, than us. I mean, at the end, I like what Brian always says, and I'm sure it's not original with him because I don't think he's ever had an original thought, but nature bats last.
I didn't say that. That was that's Guy McPherson. That was not me.
I knew that. That's why I put it in, because you never give him credit for it.
I
Damn it.
haven't said it
No,
since
and I
the
think-
last 2 years.
No, you've never. You said, I've said, you're stealing
I
those
don't.
ideas.
Both guys I know.
Listen,
I know that guy and the
no,
other
I
guy.
know. But
And
the
guy knows the other guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guys
I
know
just,
guys.
I just
got
know
that.
this guy a little better.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we're laughing about it. But it's very much the same with any change, whether you're talking about getting rid of. I mean, I believe America is systemically racist. I mean, I just think it is. I think you can't argue against it unless you don't want to believe it, right? And then you say, well, it's not real. Well, it is. But again, political power keeps it in play, just as they do, as you pointed out. Government wants the status quo. And I argue with people from time to time that while the Democrats in America are no prize, it's better to deal with somebody who's a little bit better than somebody who is horrid.
Right.
And that's the way I kind of look at the modern, modern Republican Party right now. Maybe with 6 exceptions, maybe Liz Cheney on Thursday or something. So you are trying to convert people. Would you agree?
Well,
Basically,
we try really,
to a new way
try
of
really
thinking,
hard.
or a way they're not thinking now. Yes?
Yeah, we try not to use religious language like convert.
I
and so
understand
forth,
that. I'm using that deliberately for a reason.
Okay. Well, I guess what we're trying to do is we're just trying to let people know that there's another way of feeling and thinking and doing, and that this back to this idea about a deep reverence and respect for nature. It's like it's not just like you might have a deep reverence and respect for a pet mouse, okay? But the thing is, the pet mouse isn't going to destroy you if you don't look after it, and that's the thing. So it's also about having that sort of fear. And I guess in a way, you could say if you're a religious person and liked to frame things in terms of God, because God means lots of things to different people, of course, you could actually sort of regard nature as being God, in that it is beautiful and wonderful and it supports you. But if you mess around with it, it's going to smack you. We don't. In fact, I generally have a total prohibition on the use of the word God in anything to do with.
And I understand why you do.
Yeah.
But I think it is closer to nature is far closer to what someone should see as their concept of God, and a guy with a white beard up there. But I think it is interesting because nature nurtures, and it comes back the other way. Now, you framed it as a religion for certain reasons, and I think you're absolutely right. To keep it away from that. But at the same token, you're going to have to, change hearts and minds, and not just to the politicians. I mean, I don't see how anybody can look at the world today and say, oh, yeah, we're going to be around for billions or millions or thousands or 3 more decades, depending, on how what we do. It's in our hands.
And this nihilistic sort of view of the future is widespread across so much of our culture. Like, just look at how many movies there are that are basically showing the destruction of the planet, whether it be through aliens normally. And this is where Guy McPherson's model comes in, called near-term human extinction, who's basically saying that we'll all be dead within a decade or 5 years or something because of this hyper-accelerated global heating and so forth. And so this sort of doomerism and this sort of nihilism is so widespread, and even amongst the Christians, particularly amongst the Pentecostal Christians who believe that God is coming back and the war of Armageddon. I mean, everywhere you look, everybody's basically writing us off. And what Vita is trying to do is to say, well, that's not, we don't have to go down that path. There's an alternative path, right? But that alternative path is going to get much worse before it gets better. There's no doubt about that. I mean, just the physics of climate change, you got this concept called the lag, which is that the time between when you release the carbon and when you actually feel the heat is 20 to 30 years. So hypothetically, even if we turned off the fossil generators overnight, it's going to be decades of worsening conditions before we actually start to see things start to come back the other way. And on top of that, we've got these natural feedbacks. So as it gets hotter, the forests burn more. As it gets hotter, the methane comes out of the Arctic. And, we may have already have triggered the cascade of climate tipping points, in which case we're probably going down the path that McPherson's talking about, although it'll probably take longer. But what I'm saying is if there's even a narrow window of opportunity to fix this mess, that's where we've got to put our energy.
Right.
And a way to focus on that is to attach your heart to the well-being of nature, because what is in your heart fundamentally drives your actions. It's one of the main drivers of human action. Now, let me give you a really extreme example to sort of bolster up my spirituality argument, right? What the Greenpeace types of the world have been seeking for decades is behavioral change in people's behavior. Okay. Now, what I say is that if you want, let me give you an example of behavioral change, which is really effective. Okay. Guy walking across the road. This is me at 17. Okay. I was a born again Christian for 10 months when I was 17. I meet these guys. I was living in this small country town in Western Australia doing a fisheries training course. Didn't get on with the fishermen too well, but I met these guys hitchhiking one day, born again Christians. They'd been out proselytizing, and this young guy asked me, "Do you believe in God?" And I didn't really think much of it. We had this conversation, and then they invited me around to this place where they are having like a party, and there was lots of food. And then they introduced me to this guy called Brendan, who was into scuba diving. So we were palling around doing scuba diving under the wharf, under the ships in the wharf. Totally awesome 20-year-old crazy stuff, 17-year-old. Anyway, then eventually Brendan said, "Look, dude, if you want to hang out with me, you got to come into the church." So I got involved, and I got saved, and I waved my hands and wobbled for a little while, and I rolled with them. Okay, and so my behavior changed radically from before. I was now going to church 3 times a week for multiple hours. I was reading the silly book. I was going out on the street telling people how great I was and how they were all sinners. And I was putting money into the venture as well. My behavior changed because my spiritual views changed. Okay. So I'll give you another example, more extreme. It takes about 3 months for ISIS to recruit someone from when they first contact to when they put them on the battlefield strapped to explosives. And they affect that behavioral change by shifting the way that they view the world spiritually. And when I'm talking about spiritually, what I mean is we break it down into 5 key points to make it really easy. Spirituality is such a big concept that there's no real definition that does justice to it all. It depends on the various perspectives by which you investigate spirituality. So the way that Vita views spirituality, we see it as an umbrella concept that contains many, many concepts, of which we take out 5 core ones. So, for example, the big the big question? No, the golden rule. The golden rule. So there's actually a book of this name where this guy has traveled around the world talking to all the different religions, and has found that all the religions of the world have got a common golden rule, which is expressed in the King James Bible as "do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Now, the problem with that golden rule is that it doesn't make any reference to the biosphere, which is our life support system. So Vita's golden rule is do unto others and the biosphere as you would have them do unto you. So we just simply incorporated the biosphere's interests into the grand overarching statement that we should use as the guide for our behavior. Okay, so answers to life's big questions is another one of the headings. So, for example, where did we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? And there's others, of course, they're the big 3. Well, if you talk to Christians, they'll say, where did we come from? God made us in 7 days, blah. Why are we here to, worship God? And what happens when we die? If you're good, you go to heaven. That's their worldview, if you like, right? Their meta narrative. Well, Vita says, where did we come from? We evolved here with all the other living things that were a part of a family. What happens when we die? With the minerals in our body returned into the biosphere, and other creatures might have the benefit of building their bodies out of it. They might be reanimated. And why are we here? We're here for the same reason as the trees and the bees, the whales and the snails, which is to pursue our individual interests whilst making a positive contribution to the whole. right? So that's what I mean by spirituality, is not getting into all this sort of woo-woo stuff, right? But just sort of framing it so you can get your head around it, and the woo-woo stuff, the way that you feel when you see the sun rising over a lake is a sense of awe, the sense that something greater than you. Like these are the manifestations of spirituality. Now, some people get that awe from firing guns. Some people get that awe from driving drag cars. You know what I'm saying? So what we're saying in Vita is to just understand the scope of these things and try and attune your spirituality towards nature. And what that does is it just inherently gives you a deeper reverence for the living planet and the motivation to actually take action on her behalf.
Well, and again, one of the things, and this is just a thought of mine, we've touched on it, but the rewards of the Christian religion, as proposed by the Christian religion, come after death, right? But something like this is coming while you're living, and talks about, people say, I'm concerned about my children or my grandchildren or the future. And I just have a personal opinion. I don't really think a lot of Christians are concerned about that, because they're going to go to heaven, right? I mean, that's what they believe, and it's, okay, whatever. So I hope, from a personal standpoint, that you and your group can really be successful. Now, this leads me to another question. It's been my experience in my 70 years on this planet that youth have to drive, and have driven many of our changes, because they're not, depending on how you look, they're not as corrupt, they're not as set in their ways. They're ready to go. They look at the world. I'm working now with a group that's really trying to affect gun change in America, and the people who've been affected by that are those basically under the age of, let's see, 35, right? They're the ones that go to school in America every day feeling that they won't come home. And I think from what I've read, and I'll defer to you, both of you, because you're far more versed in the environmental causes than I am, but it seems there's like quite a bunch of feeling that they understand better. That at 70, okay, the world ends. If I really don't want to care about anybody else, or really don't, I can go. But they're 20, 21, so the next 50 years. So I guess what I'm asking, I'm not doing a very good job of it. Are you targeting specific groups? Is it broad based? I mean, obviously you want to get everybody you can on board, but
yeah.
So how do you, where do you go? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah. So our model suggests that there are 53 million people in the West who will basically come on board this journey. Identify.
Can I ask where that number comes from? I'm not questioning your number, but what are the characteristics?
When we put the paperwork in through the Charity Commission, we got this analyst asked us all sorts of questions. I had to write 30 pages of text to answer all the questions, and then more questions and another 10 pages. So we had to basically drill down and put forward an argument. And so they said, how many Vitans are there? And we said, well, 5. We're just getting started.
Yeah, right.
The question is that, And so I said, but more importantly, it's like how many could there be? So we use a frame of reference called cultural creatives. Brian, you might remember me talking about this, I think, in the past.
I believe
we did
talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just paraphrase quickly. So Americans researchers who did a lot of work with the EPA trying to get into the minds of Americans with regard to messaging for environmental reasons found that there were 3 broad ways that people saw the world. And this is America, but also in the West. And they describe 55% of the public are moderns, 15% of the public are what they call conservatives, and the other 35% are cultural creatives. Okay, so broadly speaking, this is how I understand it. Moderns like the world the way it is. Conservatives are harking back to some older time, if you like, and the cultural creatives see the problems in the world and they're trying to make things better. So they tend to be left of center, they tend to be arty, they're all pro-environmental, they're pro-women's rights, pro-indigenous folk, and so forth. So what we figured was that a quarter of the cultural creatives would come on board VIDA. And that's where we got the 53 million number from. And that's around about 8% of the public. And there is another figure, which is around about 15% of the public are what's known as spiritual but not religious. So again, that's our sort of target audience. But in reality, what I've found in talking to people about this idea is that it appeals across a wide demographic. So we did a radio interview a few months ago with these two old guys in New South Wales, Clarence River Radio, and I'd sent them the book. So we've got a little book that I'll talk about in a minute. We sent them the book Vita Awakening, which you can get for free on the website, thinkvita.org. And they read it and they were raving about it. And this is a couple of old white guys. And they said, oh, I don't have any Aboriginal blood, but I totally get what you're saying, And so it sort of appeals to people across the whole spectrum, because it's not a story which is related to a particular demographic. Yeah. Right. It's a story that's related to all humans. And the reason why I say 53 million people in the West and I don't talk about Indians or Chinese people is because A, we haven't translated it yet. And secondly, I don't know those cultures. So I don't know how they would adopt it. So that's where the number comes from, and that's pretty consistent. Now, if you follow Extinction Rebellion thinking, they are saying that no non-violent rebellion has failed when you got 3.5% of the
This is Roger Hallam or whatever. Roger Hallam.
This comes from work from a woman called I think Erica Chenoweth, who references. So she did research into rebellions. She was convinced that if you wanted to change government, you needed to pick up weapons, and her research found exactly the opposite, that you're more likely to succeed in a non-violent rebellion. Okay. And that none had failed when you got that critical mass of 3.5% of the public actively involved. So if we can reach our 53 million people, that's 8% of the public. And so that sort of becomes, in a way, part of the recruitment drive for the on-ground actions that help to bring about change in a non-violent manner. So VIDA is an activist organization, is not an activist organization that wants people to do a specific thing, except to open your heart to nature, be advised in environmental science, and take right action, the action that is right for you and for the planet, right? And I'll just make a point about right action. This is one thing that I've learned from Roger Hallam from Extinction Rebellion, was he was saying basically that the Greenpeace model was basically over. It's finished. It's not suited to the times. The conditions of the planet are getting so bad that you need a more push forward activist approach than that model. And so this is when I say right action, what I say is, here's the analogy. If your neighbor's house is burning, then if you go and fill up a bucket, walk across the road, throw it on the fire, walk back, get another bucket, well, good on you for trying to put the fire out. But what you really should be doing is alerting all the neighbors, calling the fire brigade, and once you've done that, get onto your bucket brigade. So there is action, and then there is action which is more effective. And what we're trying to do through VIDA is, for those people who are taking action environmentally, is to help them sort of up their game, if you like, or to raise the stakes. And I think that you can do that by appealing to spirituality, as I've mentioned before, with the spirituality change begets behavioral change.
Mm-hmm. You were talking earlier about this, in your example of a good neighbor, right? So, Brian, I want to reach out to you for a minute. You mentioned earlier in the show that you were concerned about your ice melting. If you'd pay your electric bill, it probably wouldn't melt, and you'd be helping Joe Manchin, because I believe I lived where you did, and it's a lot of coal involved. So I think you're just not doing it the right way. So just pay your bills, okay?
You Shecky Green or something?
Yeah, you picked the worst comic. No, you can. Somebody better than Head Jackie.
Right. It's funny because I was, I've been thinking about Russia all week. Actually, Ukraine all week. And when you mentioned Hallam, I'm thinking, could this work in Russia? You know, to like turn over the government or something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I remember all those protests.
Yeah,
there were a lot of protests in
that's
England,
one
and they
of
just kind of stopped.
one of the one of the comments you often hear around Extinction Rebellion is good luck trying that sort of behavior in a repressive regime.
Right,
Well,
China or Russia.
what I understand from this, and I've watched most of his stuff. What I understand is that most places where non-violent rebellions take place are in repressive regimes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's sort of the repressive regime that makes people rise up. And
Right,
this is, in a way, is a part of the problem of the Extinction Rebellion, or the difficulty of getting it to get traction, is that most people aren't really feeling that oppressed by climate change yet. Okay, and in say in the UK, they had maybe 30,000 people involved in their actions when I was there in 2019, and then
right,
of course
you were there.
COVID came in. Yeah, I was there. I was live streaming it and talking to people and participating and soaking it up. Um, climate change is not properly understood by most people. Most people that have any understanding of it at all have it in a very fragmentary understanding, that there's this sort of idea that smoke here leads to polar bears doing something over there, but no fundamental understanding of how the whole system fits together. And that's part of our mission with Vita, because if you're spiritually connected to nature, as many people are, but don't understand any of the basics of how the earth system functions, then you're probably going to be sitting at home playing with your angel cards thinking that you're making a difference. And so, and alternatively, if you are very knowledgeable about climate change but haven't yet felt it, you're not necessarily going to take action. So one of the people in my network, her name is Alison Green. She was a pro-vice chancellor of Arden University in Cambridge for many years. Very prestigious role, loved her job. But one time she was reading climate change, and she said she got to a point where she suddenly felt it, where she felt what ecosystem collapse means. That's a spiritual, emotional response. Okay, so when it sits up here in your head, that's great, but what you think doesn't motivate your behavior. It's what you believe that motivates your behavior. And when she felt climate change, she quit her job and became a full-time climate activist. And it's a big shift in a change. Again, this is spirituality change begets behavioral change. And that's what we're trying to pioneer within Vita, is to try and find a way to materialize that idea, and that leads to people changing their behavior with respect to the environment. So our key performance indicator, if you can put it that, is how many people we can inspire to redouble or to increase their efforts to fix the planet, and putting their efforts into the most appropriate place for them and the environmental situation.
That brings up another question. I think there are quite a number of people who do want to get involved, but they're not real sure, what exactly they should do. Now, of course, the answer you've given is what you can, but will there be some guidance? I don't mean like a guidance counselor says do this or that, but will there be some suggestions that you'll be making in your group? Simple things you should do. And
yeah, so we have a concept called living with earthity. Okay, so if you go onto the website and you go to the page that says practices, then one of the practices is live with earthity. And live with earthity is basically be a good environmentalist. So if you're going to drive a car, preferentially, don't drive a car. But if you're going to drive a car, preferably drive an EV. Here's me, the hypocrite, sitting in a petrol-powered Prius. Live with earthity, basically, recycle, try, all that basic stuff. But then we have another concept called Vita Mission, which is to live a Vita Mission. And a Vita Mission is your personal mission in life. We're assuming that you're living with earthity anyway. What is it you're doing to drive forward something? What is, your special project? And so for example, my special project, my Vita Mission, is to try and connect spirituality to pro-environmental behavioral change through Vita. But there are people that are focused on marine pollution issues, developing new clean tech, setting up environmental enterprises. There's all sorts of different ways. And also recognizing that individual actions is good, but we've got to have these fundamental political shifts, as you're pointing out before. And this is where the Extinction Rebellion model comes in, is that we can't fix this without government working on towards it. Government controls policy, government raises taxation, government spends the budget, government controls the police, government controls the military. We need them as the primary agent of driving the change. And this is why it's so frustrating to see these corrupt motherfuckers like Morrison government in Australia, doing everything he can to look after the interests of the fossil fuel industry, when we know that it is sending us to oblivion. And so at some point, there's got to be an awakening amongst a broad swath of the public that we've got to really start getting sophisticated. And that's the name of the book that it's on the website, Vita Awakening. It takes about an hour and a half to read, and it frames the climate and ecological crisis and then talks about spirituality and introduces Vita's view on spirituality.
Guy, this will relate a little bit to what you're saying, because you're saying basically how the governments don't want to give up, the fossil fuel industry at this point, even though they're in a certain sense they're pricing themselves out. And this goes back I know to 1974, because I never forgot a class that I had in ninth grade, and one of the students, it was right during the Arab oil embargo, and everybody was upset. Even though we were 14, we knew our parents were in the long lines for the gas stations. I don't know if you are old enough to remember that, Guy, but I do remember that. And one of the students said, "I'm so glad this is happening." And I was taken aback, and I started, what was this guy saying? He said, "No, let the price of oil go up to $150 to $200 dollars a barrel of oil." And this is back in '74. And all of a sudden, we see that a barrel of oil is probably $100 now with Putin. So I'm thinking that, wow, if this goes up high enough, maybe it will price itself out, or maybe this event will happen, as you say, that it'll become a personal thing. But yet you've also said that they're still hanging on despite the fact that it's already kind of priced itself out. So do you think that would be helpful, that we'd have this crisis that would create this change, or does it look like they'll still hang on?
There's no doubt that the oil shocks in the 70s spurned massive investments in renewable energy technology. It grew the renewable energy industry, particularly around wind. Solar took I think a bit longer, but once they'd figured out the technology for solar PV, and they're pumping this stuff out now. It's so cheap, it's ludicrously inexpensive. And of course, everyone says, "Oh, you can't run a modern economy on solar because the sun goes down." Well, yeah, but what you do with a modern grid is you interconnect a bunch of different energy generators, okay, and you have storage, and you have load shedding, and you have all of these different mechanisms. We would be on a path to getting off fossil fuels in Australia within 15 years if it wasn't for the government holding that back, right? The market economic. I was reading the other day, there was an area, they call it a renewable energy park. It was this territory in New South Wales where they basically said, okay, let's have some bids to put renewables in here. They had bids for 43 gigawatts of energy, installed energy in solar and wind. I think that's almost the equivalent of how much the total energy is in Australia. It's a vast amount, but the federal government is running interference, and the state governments, or let's say, for example, in this Queensland, where they're very progressive in terms of their renewable energy technology, and yet they're still allowing the opening up of new coal mines. So it's like, it's clever. I can understand the real politic behind it, because that you want to go towards renewables, but politically that there's so much money tied up, and so many of your other ministers, for example, that are in the pocket of the fossil industries, that you can't work against the fossil industry. So you continue to allow them have what they want, and at the same time as you're then being really progressive in your renewables. So there's this slow move towards this thing. But as I'm saying, overall, as the economy continues to grow, you've got to add new energy generators anyway. So all that's really happened in the last 20 years is that the growth of renewables has made up for the growth in the economy. Meanwhile, you've still got this massive chunk of fossil generators, which are putting out in the order of 43,000 million tons of heat trapping gas into the atmosphere every year. And every year that we allow that to go on, it's just more and more and more heat trapping gas going into the atmosphere, into an already overheated planet. Serious business.
Right.
Can I switch gears for a minute here? Unless and certainly you Guy can return to anything, but we got probably some people tonight, and they'll view this later. And we do have you here, and Brian, who is our resident Russian Ukraine expert in terms of the language and has visited it.
I've been to the Ukraine
So
a few times
I'm
too.
gonna-
I mean, it's much not just Russia. So you're right. I mean, I'm not an expert, no, but I have been.
No,
to
no,
Ukraine a
but
couple of
no,
times.
so I'm gonna speak for the Americans tonight, and then later I'll speak for my granddaughter, or pretend to be my granddaughter. So let's start here. Obviously, this is something we haven't seen in Europe for a long time. So either one of you guys, I guess the question is, does it surprise you? Has anything surprised you? And of course, grab that crystal ball that we all have and tell everybody what's happened next. And no, of course you can't do that. But what do you see? So either Brian or Guy, run
Guy,
with it.
you're our guest. You go.
I think the comment was made that there's never been a military incursion in Europe like this since the end of the war. I mean, the scale of what they've done, I think, is phenomenal. And my reading, but might also be my deep hope getting in the way of it, is that it's not going as well for,
Right.
it's not a cakewalk that like they thought it might be. And that I think they might have misunderstood the proficiency of the Ukrainian military and also their passion to fight. And remember also that in a basic hypothetical battle situation, the invader is always at a disadvantage because they're not fighting. The Ukrainians are fighting for Ukraine, whereas the Russians are fighting because they've been told to. So that, and again, it comes back to this spirituality that when the men are spirited because they're defending their land, they are more tenacious and they're better fighters.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
So when you put all these factors together, and apparently what I'm reading as well is that over the last 15 years or so, that there's been a lot of effort put into by the Europeans and by the NATO forces to help train and raise a professional army with proper weapons, modern weapons in Ukraine, and that maybe hasn't been properly factored in as well. And I was reading this article in the Guardian this morning about this Ukrainian guy that wanders out of his house in the fields, and there's a column of tanks, and he goes and says hi to these Russians, and he says, "What's going on, guys?" And he said, "Oh, we ran out of fuel." I said, "Okay, where are you going to?" "Oh, we don't know." And he talked to the whole column, and nobody knew what they're doing. Nobody knew what they were doing. And so there just seems to be this idea that you just move the military forces in, and then if you have got this military superiority, that therefore you're going to be able to achieve your objective. And I'm just hoping that the Russians just get bloodied and eventually just whimper out with massive losses. I'm thinking that Russia is just such a dangerous force in the world. It's an oligarchy. It doesn't have a democratic mechanisms built in. It's a wrecking ball,
Right.
and it's climactically a wrecking ball because their economy is mainly devoted to fossil fuels,
Right.
and they don't want the transition away from fossil fuels, which is what's necessary to protect the biosphere from collapsing. So we've got this monster country that may have actually just gone and put itself in a place where it gets bloodied, because the West will not forget this. They will be under these sanctions and prohibitions for decades. It could be, the way that I read it the other day was, it's going to be a decade of them having to sit in the naughty corner until they change out their whole governance
Good
system.
point.
Right.
Okay,
Guy, this
so
is what.
so there might be something good come out of this in a way that if Russia might get bloodied enough that it just pulls its head in and it starts to become a decent world citizen.
Guy, I don't know if you're familiar with Hal Sparks, but he's a comedian who's just a brilliant. I say a young man. He's probably in his 40s, and he made a good point today. And I've seen it once on CNN. And those of you who are watching and have seen something like this, you'll know what I'm talking about. I spoke about this with Dave. Hal Sparks believes that the Russians will try to keep Ukraine intact. They don't want to destroy it because they want to obviously be able to rule over the entire country, and they want to have basically all the infrastructure there, for the exception of the airfields and that they had to take out, which means they have to limit the aerial bombardment. And so far, that's been somewhat true. So they're going to have to come in with the tanks. And this gets back to the letter from, not the letter, well, the call from Zelensky to Trump with the ask of, can you send us the Stinger missiles, which are, I mean, the Javelin missiles, which are just absolutely amazing at just destroying tanks. They're just a godsend. So Trump says, well, you got to do me a favor first. So you can see where Trump is in this, which already creates questions, but I won't go there tonight. But what I will say is that this weapon is so destructive when it comes to those tanks, and it can be taught in 1 hour, and it's just it's fantastic. So if the Russians don't do this air bombardment and they come in with the tanks, you see now why they didn't really seem to care about all the different armaments from from Slovakia, from Germany with the Stinger missiles. But the one thing the Russians were extremely afraid of was the Javelins, and that was the one that Trump was holding off on. But now that Biden got in just in time, hopefully it looks like that may make things interesting. And as you say, they've got skin. I mean, I think basically what you were saying is they have skin in the game. And, you have a Russian who's, like you said, he's taking orders. Those poor kids don't know one way or another. I mean, there may be some, people who really like Putin.
Yeah.
But
Look,
no, I think you're right. I mean, it at the very least, there's going to be a lot of blood.
Yeah, you can't hold territory with planes. You've got to have men on the ground, and you bring them in by chopping everything's the threat down with the heavy armor. I've been watching this. In fact, before this whole war started over the last few days, one of the things I binge watch on YouTube is this show called the Kalashnikova Show, which is this really peppy female journalist in Russia who's got like full access and this like really, full production quality team. And she goes and visits these tank factories, and she goes out for a ride in the tank, and they show it firing. And it's really, really entertaining. It's like this war culture that you don't have over here. I just can't imagine a female journalist in Australia getting Australian people excited about a Bushmaster bloody anti-tank. So, but anyway, she was doing this. They've got this new weapon system called they're calling it the Terminator, and it's a tank body, but rather than having a normal turret with a single cannon on it, it's got this assembly with two 30-millimeter machine guns with rocket launch things and other machine guns. It's basically designed to go into urban areas and annihilate human beings to create the path for the tanks to come in. And so I was just, before I came on the show here, I was just looking at some feeds, and there's so much misinformation on the social media feeds. I've actually accidentally shared it myself a few times, and then I only later realized that that I got it wrong. But there was two tanks that came into an urban area that were set upon by Molotov cocktails. And I just think of the movies that you've seen where they put one Molotov cocktail on the tank. These things had 30 Molotov cocktails thrown onto them. 30. These two tanks were just basically engulfed in flame, and these things and this is the public fighting back using the tools that they've got. So, the other thing is that the Russians seem to have underestimated the will of the Ukrainians to fight. That's the first thing. They've underestimated potentially the ability to the fighting capacity, quality of their men and their arms. They've still taken down planes So whilst they may have lost their air force, they've still, like you're saying, got these Stingers, which are ground to air as well. So they're still able to actually fight against the air invasion. And then once the tanks come in, assuming that the boys don't run out of fuel and they know where they're going, then there's a good chance they're going to meet the Stinger missiles, of which Germany has just offered another 500 out of its own armory. So it could be in their hands. So it could be just this. It could just be this bloody quagmire for the Russians. Now, the other part of the equation is, if you follow the way the Russians behaved in Grozny, they were using TOS-1 thermobaric weapons in the capital. Okay, so this is the multi-rocket launch system with the 24 rockets that travel about 20 kilometers.
Those things you see in World War II that were flying off to Berlin or whatever.
Yeah. Well, with this particular one, it's a really long rocket, so it's got a long range. But the warhead, they can put a thermobaric warhead, which is a fuel air explosive, which is where the actual warhead doesn't contain the oxidizer. It gets the oxygen from the air, so it basically explodes a cloud of vapor and then ignites the vapor, and it creates this massive overpressure. And that is just that if they start using those sorts of weapons that they are seen in the convoys, so that they're on the battlefield against Kiev, that will just annihilate thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. But then what that will do, it will just create this even greater mob mentality amongst the Western countries that Russia has to be taken out. Okay, so I don't know. It could go both ways. The probably the best outcome for it would be that it winds up in the space of a week and a half, and the Russians pull out with a bloody nose, and but it could go on for months, and it could just turn into a really, really, really dark phase if they start bringing in these other weapons. They don't need to use.
Giving up, though. I think Putin, he's the man. It seems like he literally could be insane.
Well, they could. I mean, there could be some sort of a palace coup in
right.
Russia.
That's the other thing that's out there. Sure.
Yeah.
Brian,
was it?
Anything surprised you? I mean, you've been following it very closely.
I think what Guy said, it and it's not even the journalists, it's not even the moderators of these shows on the news programs. It's just this idea that here you have this massive army, and of course the Ukraine, as Guy says, they're tough people, but probably they didn't get what they really, really needed. Probably not the greatest army out there. I thought that the Russians were just going to just blow through it, at least from the way that Putin was talking, and you saw this build-up. But just looking at it, I'm saying, okay, Russians will probably win, but as Guy said, I mean, they're going to get bloodied. It's almost like they're going to lose some teeth out of this thing, and it just seems to me that they must be having some problem. And I'm hoping, now I don't know, this is where you guys can chime in, because you obviously you have the CIA, you have different intelligence organizations that are probably at work right now. Now that they've taken out the airspace and certain routes to get these weapons, I guess the weapons have to come usually from Poland or Slovakia. How do they get these things through to replenish the Stingers, replenish the Javelins? And then, of course, the Russians are going to be looking for it now because they've really cordoned off 2/3 of the country. And they say, okay, now we're going to watch. But what happens if they do go after that and it's right on the border and they hit the Polish border, and now you've tripped NATO?
Well, I think Guy touched on a huge point. If you look at it in history, there's no way the American colonists should have beaten the war machine of the British when they did. It formed our country. Now, that had a distance that was different, but remember, they brought in Hessians who really weren't that committed. And if what we're reading is true, I saw that same story that Guy saw, and there was a couple others like that the Russian troops, young, like troops are, really don't know exactly why they were there. Some have even indicated, I thought we were just really running a border exercise. Well, when it gets real, it's not. The second thing is, and Brian, this gets to your question, we've never really faced and neither has Australia, by distance and water, the types of things that have been going on in Europe forever, right? And there's a sense, I would think, in Poland, some of the other countries, that they know full well what Russia has done, before, what Germany did under Hitler, what a madman can do, what a power-hungry person can do. And I think, they'll be more apt to risk certain things. Maybe some of their own people sneaking. Now, again, it's a propaganda, as all war are. But you've seen a number of pictures. I'm sure both of you. One stuck with me. It may have been totally posed, totally fake. Still very effective. This young couple decided to get married, then went and enlisted with the People's Militia. And they're going out to fight because they kind of made a comment that, this is for any children that we may have someday. We need a country. Brian, and from the American opinion, Guy from the Australian opinion, if you'd be so kind on this. Of course, nothing Donald Trump does should surprise any of us. I think we've kind of given up that effect. But it was really somewhat, I keep saying I'm never going to get shocked by the man again. But to hear him say, smart move, Putin's going to bring peace, this is the way to do it. How does that play in Australia, Brian, if it plays, or Guy, if it plays at all? And Brian, were you in any way surprised, and I will not say you should be, anything that divides Trump and the Republican Party is good for America. And you notice that either some people couldn't carry on with that, some of his good buddies. So maybe Putin underestimated going in, right? And maybe Trump underestimated the power of him to make treasonous, nonsensical, absurd, reprehensible, morally repugnant comments. What about that?
I don't know. First of all, Guy, you would know more than anybody. Did something happen a couple of weeks ago with China and Australia with the ship or something?
Or there's been an ongoing argy-bargy between Australia and China. They blocked the Chinese blocked the import of Australian coal for a while, and then when they started running out of coal, then they kind of surreptitiously started the flow again. Australia also signed on to this thing called AUKUS, which is a US, UK, Australian military pact that sees Australia getting these massively expensive submarines, nuclear-powered submarines. And I think that really annoyed the Chinese. But there's a lot of tension between Australia and China, in the main part because Australia's allegiances is with the West and through the US military alliance and so forth. So, and particularly under Morrison, who doesn't really, who just seems to be very, very much kowtows to the US. So, there was conversations between Morrison and Trump when Trump was in power, and you could just feel as though Australia was just basically being gifted to the man, through the Morrison government.
Is there a relationship between Taiwan and Australia?
I don't think a particularly strong one. I don't think so. I don't know. Don't know about that.
It's just that they're closest to China. Your country is closest to China, and it's like the bellwether thing. If something was going to happen there, because a lot of people say this would be the time for China to invade Taiwan, while the world's direction is right on Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think that the Chinese are watching the way that the West approaches Russia vis Ukraine, because it's obviously it's not the same conflict, but if China were to take Taiwan militarily, it would be very similar geopolitically to Russia stepping into because whilst Ukraine is in the heart of Europe, and of course Taiwan is in the middle of the South China Sea or wherever it is, it's part of the family. You know what I'm saying? It's part of the Western modern economic states, democratic governance, and so we protect the family, whether they actually are tightly coupled in or whether they're on the other side of the world.
Dave?
Yeah, I was thinking, I've been very critical of social media, but sometimes it can be used for good in what it's created for. So I want to go back. My opinion, I think one of the things that changed American minds so much about the treatment of blacks in the South was television, right? If that had happened 25 years earlier, no television, no pictures, etc. Now, I've been reading things today, and you can watch the war unfold on YouTube, right? And they're actually using like GPS phones to give tank tracking. But I think even more effective are these pictures of horror, right? And I wish I'd made this comment because I thought it was so interesting. They said basically Putin's waging a 20th century, a mid 20th century war in the 21st century. And there are certain things, not even militarily things, but Guy stressed it before, and I think it's so important for all of us, is the idea of whatever you call it. Some people call it behavior modification. I like the spiritual idea because it fuels you. But you change, you change behavior, and one of the things that can do that are these pictures coming out of there. There was a gentleman quoted in the Washington Post. A military guy said, "We're getting from civilians better intel than we had in the entire World War II."
Yeah.
So it could be interesting that one of the things we look as our demise, when used properly, which is kind of what it was created for. The other thing that does, like I said, doesn't surprise me with Trump, but I hope, as I said before, so this is my ardent hope, that maybe this time he said something that will actually begin to pull people away from him. This idea, as they see the pictures, Brian, I've talked about this, was 190,000, right? Last figure I saw, I don't know where, masked on a border, right? Mm-hmm. For me, I make it real simple, right? I don't know all the geopolitical or historical. So if I look at a conflict, I say, number one, who started it? Putin started it, right? I don't see any other way. There's no argument that Ukraine started it. Secondly, I look at who's the bad guy in this, because I'm going to probably go with the underdog or the good guy. So I think, again, I have to be, in this case, anti-Russian government, anti-Putin, because right now Putin is the government. And then I think the one that Americans should be looking at is which one is more our enemy in terms of possible harm to us. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but if the Ukraine stands independent, does what I agree with Guy, a couple of weeks, pushes out, right? And Veg's comment just makes sense. You don't disturb a nuclear site and expect it something to go up in the air and around. So, maybe best case scenario, and Guy, you said it earlier. You didn't say it in these words, but sometimes out of bad things, good things can come. And this would be kind of a double win if Putin gets pushed back, even by, there's enough dissent in Russia that, that not everybody's going, yay, right?
Well, they certainly aren't applauding it. But the thing is, though, they will crack down as soon as you have those protests. They come right out and detain you.
I understand that, but
it's still good that they're doing it.
No, and I'm saying you've got Eastern European countries who've been under domination and will do everything they can, probably to help the Ukraine, and then here in America we have Putin stupid light, the former president. maybe putting his foot in the mouth. So it doesn't redeem the action from one lost life in the Ukraine.
Well,
But
let me ask you this,
I just
both
hope
of
something
you.
good comes out of it.
As far
I'm
as
sorry.
and there were talks. Veg was talking about radiation in Chernobyl. It's
Chernobyl.
my
Right?
perspective or experience that there are other reactors there at Chernobyl. So the Russians come in. I don't know who's manning if there are people there. I would assume there are people there. But what happens to these other reactors if you don't have somebody there to operate them? Guy, do you want to add 2 cents
I,
there?
I, my understanding is the reason why they, like you were saying before, they don't want to go in there and destroy all of the energy generation plants because then they would have a country that doesn't work anymore and they wouldn't be able to run it afterwards, right? So one of the reasons I was reading that they took Chernobyl, which of course is the site of the accident with the huge sarcophagus and the large terrain, which is basically uninhabitable because it's got radioactive stuff, is because that was actually the main pathway to get tanks in from Belarus. So they wanted to secure that area to secure their access. That's what I heard. So they would have taken it, A, to control the power station, um, and B, to control that territory. So there was also some fighting around a big hydro power station. I think the Russians took that. There was a video of a helicopter flying around this hydro plant and this Russian flag on the top of it. So they'll take the the energy generation infrastructure and hold on to that, actually to protect it as much as anything else. Um, but as for whether it's interfering with the maintenance work that goes on to keep the Chernobyl accident site, I don't know. I don't know what's happening there. It doesn't. I mean, and this is part of the problem as well. This is not. I've been doing a lot of research recently on the Battle of Agincourt. I watched this movie called The King, just absolutely beautiful movie, and it was about Henry V, and it featured this sequence with the Agincourt with the French knights coming in and getting plowed down by the British archers, and back in those days, there was no fossil fuels being consumed when you fought one army against the next. Um, and there might have been a bit of coal burn in order to drive the furnaces to make the arrowheads, but nothing like a militarized
Right.
army. There was no nuclear power stations could accidentally get hit by a stray missile. There were no landfills filled with millions of tons of plastic and trash that could end up burning because somebody accidentally drops a thermobaric weapon onto it. This. I mean, we're in such a mess. I've actually written a statement from Vita to the Russian Federation. And what I'm planning to do when I've got some resources is to basically get some beautiful Vita flags made up. And just the same way that Putin makes an address to the world standing in front of the Russian Federation flag, I want to stand in front of the Vita flags. And the address is basically saying, you know, what we should be doing right now, what the Russians should be doing right now, is figuring out how to transform their economy to run on renewable energy. That's what they should be putting their efforts into, not sending their bloody tanks and them armies and military in to go and annihilate another country. Now, what I've also been reading about the motivations for Russia was that Russia is paranoid that it doesn't want to have a NATO country on its border.
Right,
You can
right,
kind of understand that.
right.
It wants to have a buffer of neutral zones. And so when Ukraine becoming more and more independent over the last decade, since they got rid of the pro-Russian president, back in when that was 8 years ago or so, the Russians are freaked out because the Ukrainians are making noises about joining NATO, which means that they would have NATO on their border. And I think that's the main reason for Russia for actually making this move is to smash them. So it actually might be a motivation for them to end the war early, because it might be that just smashing Ukraine is enough to let them know that they're better off not joining NATO. If you know what I'm saying?
Well, I understand that. I think that's part of it. The NATO. That's what Putin will even kind of mention it in a certain sense. NATO, but a lot of people think that it's the idea that you have a democracy that could become more and more successful. You know how much
Yeah.
Putin, he will deal with Republicans, but he doesn't deal with Democrats. And that
Yeah.
starts to make strange sense there. And then he sees Poland doing well, and then a Russian sees, well, hold it. Finland has the same geography as we do,
Yeah.
but they're doing really, really well, and it sucks here.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they're going to be dragging him around like Gaddafi in the streets. So I think that's part of it. And by the way, Guy and Dave, that was something that I could not understand. I intuitively felt it, but I didn't understand it when I was around 12 or 13 when Brezhnev was, with, I guess, negotiating for the SALT things, the SALT Treaty or whatever it was. But they were dealing with Republicans, with Nixon. And I go, what is it about the Russians? Because the Republicans are the ones that seem to be the hawks. But they want to deal with them. They didn't want to deal with Obama. They don't like liberals. And maybe it's, this is historical, but with Catherine the Great, when you had the French Revolution, she was opening things up to Russia. But when the French Revolution happened and they saw what happened, these people were losing their heads, then all of a sudden they had these repressive movements going on in Russia then. So Russia's never been good with liberals, quite frankly. So I don't know that they would, and I'm going to call you a liberal because you are obviously associated more with the left like we are. I don't see them ever being attracted to liberalism or progressivism. I just don't see it. They're the worst. You've even said it's a problematic country.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that as well. In Australia, the word liberal actually means the opposite to what it means in America.
Mm-hmm.
So in Australia, liberals are the government that the left people want to get rid of and never see again. Mm-hmm. It's actually called the Liberal Party. It's actually LNP, Liberal National.
Is that just LNP, like semantic fiat, or what are they doing when they say liberal? I mean, so they're actually the conservatives.
Yeah, the conservatives, exactly. Yeah. So right wing, pro fossil fuels, pro establishment, all of that stuff. And look, the world is going through an energy revolution, an energy transition right now, like has happened in the past when, the Industrial Revolution started off with water mills, and eventually they ran out of rivers to tap for water mills. And at the same time, they were discovering how to use coal, and the science of thermodynamics was being understood, and the development of the early steam engines. And then you started getting from the coal, you moved into the oil, you still got the coal and the oil and then the gas, and we're moving through another energy transition into renewables, because renewables are better. They're just better. They don't run out. You're not depleting the resource. They don't pollute the atmosphere. The fuel is free. They've got, the renewables in Australia now, we've got, it's cheaper to build a solar farm than to keep a coal plant running.
Right.
It's just ridiculously cheap. Okay. And so as this energy revolution is coming along, not only the revolution in the production of energy, but the revolution in the efficient use of energy. So the spread of electric vehicles, the spread of hybrid vehicles like the Prius was revolutionary. It consumes half as much fuel as a regular car. So this energy revolution is shaking establishment to its very core. And like Russia, 60 or 80% of its economy comes from selling fossil fuels, and the world's moving away from fossil fuels. So anyone that's invested into the fossil industry is starting to fear for the future and starting to act in a belligerent manner to protect their interests.
Can I follow up that with a question I've thought about? Okay. You don't find too many in America, and I assume in the world, poor companies that deal in fossil fuel. The companies are wealthy because that's what they're established for, which would give them a base that if they chose to, would be in the best position, I would think, to actually lead the conversion. Now, I'm not saying they will, I'm not saying that, but is there some validity to that if they chose to, couldn't they be in the forefront?
Well, absolutely. Look at BP back in 20 years ago, actually changed its name from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum, and they got rid of the little green shield logo and they brought in the green sunflower logo, and that was this part of this narrative about becoming an energy company as opposed to an
Right.
oil company. Right. Well, what happened then was they didn't. They closed down BP Solar. They had the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, and they continued business as usual. And they're still drilling holes and exploring for oil in the North Sea. So the question really is, why aren't the fossil fuel industries doing this enlightened path, right? And a part of that is, I think, that they didn't invent the renewable energy, but they don't control it, right? I mean, they could go and buy companies. But the other thing is that they don't have the internal empathies or skills or knowledge, and that you've got people that have spent 45 years in the petroleum industry. What is he going to go home and say? Hey, I'm decided I'm now going to be in the solar industry. They can't do it, right? The leadership is ossified, and I think that's a part of it as well. And this is kind of a good thing in a way, because that they're going to go down with the ship, so you get a little bit of payback, right?
For that.
So, but there are examples, and I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but there are examples of fossil fuel companies that are diversifying. I'll give you an example. Actually, there's a fellow called St Baker in Australia who owns some big coal plants, but he also owns a company that produces an electric car charging device, which is actually extremely popular and selling millions of dollars around the world. So here's a guy with feet in both camps.
Right.
Now, obviously, if he was a Vegan or had had an awakening to nature, then he would let go of his fossil reserves and then focus on the new technology. And this is what's really frustrating, is that if we could just let this transition, if we would facilitate this transition, we would be powered by renewables by mid-century without a problem technically. But what's happening is all of these malign, malignant forces are retarding what the public wants. The public doesn't want it. The public doesn't care fundamentally where the power comes from. It just wants
if they have the
water
power,
to get
right?
Right. So a part of it is nobody really cares where their energy comes from, and if the choice was a form of energy which destroyed the planet versus one which didn't destroy the planet, well, we know which way they'd be voting. And now that the clean energy is actually cheaper, the government is actually holding back, retarding the public getting access to clean and cheap energy. It's perverse. And it's like these two powerful forces are pushing against each other. And at some point, something's got to give. And I'm sure that at some point, there will just be this day where we wake up where some massive geopolitical event will occur, which will basically signal the end of the fossil fuel industry, like the rapid winding up of it. And it might actually be this business in Ukraine, because what Ukraine has taught the Germans, okay, is that fossil fuels are a pain in the ass, right? And you can power Germany using renewables if only you invest the billions of dollars necessary to do so. And it might be that this whole argument around Nord Stream 2 and the gas and the Russians using gas as a weapon, all this stuff, it might simply be what the trigger to actually get the Western countries, particularly Western Europe, to just go, okay, we're getting off fossil fuels. They're just too much trouble, because they've already agreed to do so through the Paris Agreement, but they're just not following up with the action.
Listen, Guy,
you spoke up. I'm sorry.
Okay, good, Dave.
Go ahead.
No, just saying, Guy has some picks that he wanted to show.
As one of my last comments, I see by my clock on the wall, we're winding down. You spoke about your Avita mission, that everybody would have, and then you spoke about the what would I say? Making a plea talk, a reasonable talk to the Russians with your Vita flags, symbolically, like that. I'd like to say that we could give Brian a kind of a Vita mission tonight. He's fluent in Russian. Why don't we write a letter? You write yours and I'll write mine, and we'll give them to Brian, and he can hand deliver them to Mr. Putin. Do you think that's a good idea?
I don't know about that.
Well, we might ask Brian to record an audio of the speech, so that we can actually have a Russian.
We could do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
or maybe
he likes danger. He wants
No,
to be
I
out
look.
there.
I was there during the coup in '91. I don't need any more danger than that was.
Yeah, you do.
So, Guy, you had
and
some.
Brian, yeah,
Good
just
guy.
one other thing. If you've got a green screen, so what I was going to do was to actually make the flags. I've got a photograph of the flags on this online flag builder thing. So the idea was to actually do a shoot me doing the presentation against the green screen and then add the flags to the back.
That'd be great.
So you could do a green screen shot reading it in Russian,
Right.
and then we could have you as one of our narrators.
All right. That sounds great. That'd
Okay,
be a
okay.
deal. So keep in touch with me
Yep.
on that. We love that.
Okay, I will.
So here we go. We have
Okay,
some photographs that you've
photos.
brought us.
Yeah. Okay, so can you see on the photo? We got that big green thing there, and then on the right hand side of the green thing, there's that like the little stalk that goes to the land. Well, that's where
Right.
Motel Prius is parked right now. In fact, there's a little where my cursor was. That white dot is exactly where the car is parked as we speak.
Oh, really?
And so this, yeah. So I've got Moreton Bay in front of me, the yacht club behind me, and when I drove this morning to go basically into town, I got about 50 meters, and then I couldn't because there was a lake because the whole bloody suburb is flooded right now, and it's just started raining again.
And there is your car
Yeah,
in the parking lot.
so that's where I am right now on the back seat on the left hand side.
Okay.
Motel Prius. That's the beach after the tide went out and the rain stopped for a while this
That's
morning.
interesting. There, you have what looks like grass there, and then all of a sudden you have sandy.
Yep.
I've never seen it like that. All right. Usually we have
Yeah,
like marshes and reeds and things like that.
I think this is actually artificial. This is man-made. I think.
Oh, really? Okay, then that would.
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
explain it all.
It's a marina. So they put the rock wall down there, and then they've reinforced it with sand and put a grass on it. Yeah, so that's that bit on the right-hand side. That's what I tried to drive through. Then I realized that I needed a submarine, not a Toyota Prius.
Yeah, then you'll have you'll have a I don't know. Yeah, you'll have a submarine, and you know it's interesting though. I had I don't know. It's called the. It's not a manifold, but I guess it's just the cover for the engine under the car. Now I don't know anything about cars, but I remember my wife and we went through this like a foot and a half of water and just ripped off that engine cover. And I guess it protects the engine from the water, but I don't even go near water now when it's like a foot or more. It just frightens me.
Well, you don't know how deep it is. I mean, if you knew it was 3 inches all the way along, you wouldn't be worried about it so much. But you just don't know what comes next. If you go into a hollow, you could end up halfway up the
right.
door.
But everybody's in a rush. They want to get home. They see a few cars trying to go through, and then all of a sudden you hit pay dirt. Now what's this?
That's just the stormwater rushing out through the stormwater drain. So that flooded area was basically being drained by those, but it was only draining it so fast. And if it was dumping rain down, the rain was raining faster than it was draining out.
Mm-hmm. Is there those palm trees I see in the distance?
Yep, a lot of palm trees, coconut palms and the like.
Wow. Okay. There's the Prius.
Another view of the car.
And then, by the way, how old is that car now?
That's 2008.
Wow.
And actually, on the Vita website, I've put a page called Motel Prius, where I've gone and found. I've actually found more, but I can only put a maximum of 24 YouTube videos of people living out of their Priuses and all the different ways that they've set them up and all the different compromises you make. And I thought there was only one or two, but apparently there's dozens of them. And that's dozens of people that are living in a Prius and doing YouTube videos. So you can imagine that there's thousands of people living out of Priuses.
This is your
around the
second home, correct?
This is my only home at the moment. I've got
really?
a shed. Yep, I've got a shed up in Noosa with stuff in storage. But this is how I live at the moment.
Wow.
And what I'm thinking about doing potentially with the resources when we get funded is to potentially just go and get another. See, this vehicle is excellent for. It's like a mini camper van, all right? You've got to set it up right. I've taken the front seat out. And so what I'm doing at the moment is I'm sitting on the back seat and then the other side of the back seat is laid forward, so that makes a bunk, a full-length bunk. And so the vehicle's got an air conditioner, it's got music, stereo. I've got a camping gear in here so I can cook. I cooked up some eggs before, and so the way that I do Motel Prius is stealth, right? So there's no luggage rack on the top with extra stuff. There's no
Right.
thing hanging off the back with extra stuff. And so you can basically, sometimes I just pull up on the side of the road, park in amongst all the other vehicles, and then go to sleep, wake up, and drive off again. So this is like stealth mode. And because it's a hybrid, you can leave the air conditioning running, which is really necessary this time of year because it's really muggy. And the engine will basically just kick in and out. It'll draw down on
Once
the
in a while,
battery,
right,
the big traction battery,
Mm.
and it'll just kick in for a couple of minutes to charge the battery up and then turn off again.
Right. I
And it
have
just
that
does
with
that all
mine.
night. Yeah, you eventually just become accustomed to the noise
The
of that.
same car.
Yeah, so it's
Brian,
a really
I think your
excellent
wife
way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, Brian, I think your wife, Ronnie, would really like you to get one of those and tour America for about 10 years and then come back to your home. I'll ask her
You
about
should
it. But I think
speak,
she'd like
fella. I know what Judy says to you. Get out of here.
that. Yeah, well, that's true too.
I'm just kidding. And
And it's fuel efficient. That's the other thing as well. So I get about 5 liters per 100 kilometers.
now you must have 400,000 miles on that car.
Well, I've done a few. I've been living out of the vehicle on and off over the last 2 years, and I've traveled from Brisbane up to Townsville, which is 1,800 kilometers, and then all the way back down and spent 5 weeks in Tasmania. And so it's just a really excellent way of traveling around the country to find things and look around and see what's there, and really inexpensive.
We have a question. Joey, our good friend Joey, wants to know how you shower, guy.
That's actually the trouble is finding hot showers around the place. So when I'm in Noosa, I go to the recreation center and I give them $2 and I get a hot shower there. In Mullaney, there was a place where they had a public access hot showers, which was really good because I was in Mullaney during winter and they were really very, very welcome, those hot showers. Showers are problematical, but you can also do like a sponge bath in the vehicle. And then periodically I go and stay at other people's places. I was house sitting a friend's house for a few days. And after about 2 or 3 days, you start getting a hankering to get back in the car again because when you wake up to all these different environments. I quite often wake up under trees. I always try to park under a tree or actually back up into the tree. So you wake up with the whole back of the vehicle is basically surrounded by vegetation. And sometimes you wake up and you go, where am I?
So now you travel all over Australia?
Yeah. I do a little bit of off-road, but only if the tracks are good. It's got a very low clearance, the Prius, so it's not good on dirt roads. But apparently there is a jack you can get. You can actually raise the Prius by 1.5 inches, which is going to be very valuable. So I go to national parks sometimes. I haven't done a lot of off-roading in it. But with proper sort of off-road tires and better springs and these lifts, then it'll be much safer to go off-road.
So if I may ask you, how long have you been living in the Motel Prius? Because I read
on and
Motel
off
2 years, Brian. He already said that.
Yeah, on and off.
Would you listen?
I started when we had a COVID lockdown for 3 months. And when that ended, I was just going stir crazy. So that's when I fitted the bunk in the back. Well, when I say put the bunk in the back, I mean I just laid the back seat forward
Right.
and put a sleeping bag on it. It wasn't a big modification. The other mod that I did was the vehicle comes with a jockey wheel, the little tiny wheel that
Right.
you get if you got a... Yeah, so that wasn't suitable for Australian roads. So I ditched that, bought a new wheel, but it didn't fit. There's a plastic panel that you put storage. So I cut a hole in the plastic panel to let the wheel come through. So that's now... Oh, and I needed to deflate it as well because it was too wide. So it's got a little electric pump. So if I need to change the tire, I just bring out the flat tire and then put the electric pump on it. And then taking the front seat out. But that's really the only modifications that I've done. And then the other thing is just knowing where to store things because you've got obviously a limitation in space. So that's just I've got basically underneath, behind the back seat, the driver's seat, I've just got a camp stove and a bunch of cooking gear, and I basically got like 8 of these t-shirts. This is a really good quality Japanese cotton t-shirt, and 4 pairs of jeans, and so it's a relatively small amount of clothing in terms of volume. And I just do a wash at the laundry every 10 days to 14 days, keep the clothes fresh, and then just try to find a hot shower if I go to a new town. And if not, go without a shower for a day, which is not the worst thing in the world.
Not the worst
Or
thing.
go for a swim, of course.
Right, you could do that.
Or just stand outside, because it's like the whole of southeast Queensland is under a warm shower right now.
Right.
Last 4 days, the whole place is flooded. The reason why I'm in Scarborough now is because I was trying to get up to Noosa, but the roads were blocked for Noosa, and then I found I couldn't go back either.
No.
Brian, it looks like with your eyes, you're fascinated with the way Guy's living, but you're a little concerned about roughing it. My understanding in America right now, there's a group of truckers who are headed to DC. If you want to link up with them,
I think there's
you know,
only
and
one
then
there
I could
now,
say-
Dave. One, it started
no,
off
the
with,
one guy turned around. That
Right.
was what was. No, there's another one headed. So you
Yeah,
can
so-
ride with them, sort of
Right.
like.
Well, Guy, it's
You can do that.
been wonderful talking with you again, and you're certainly welcome to come on the show anytime you want. We loved talking to you, especially about the environment. But I'm going to be straight up with you. I mean, I love when you talk about politics, because you obviously, it seems to me, you could interchange this with that, and you'd be right there. So it's always
great.
good to get
Look
your
forward to the next
insight,
one.
and we really do appreciate that. And again, you're welcome anytime to come on the show. We're here every
Fantastic.
Saturday, and of course
Yep,
it's Sunday.
great.
So.
Yep.
So,
Okay,
Dave?
fantastic. Thank you for having me. I look forward to the next one.
Well, enjoy your day, and looks kind of nice out there today, I suppose. Maybe get a swim. No,
Oh, it's just started pouring again, so it's going to get
all right.
noisy. Pretty.
We don't have to jump
Good
into
weather report, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you
Guy.
so much, Guy. This is on our channel, so you can see it again if you'd like. And Dave,
Yep.
behave yourself. All right.
I'm going to do one plug before I leave. We get inundated with things, but I would really encourage everybody. I'm going to do it. Just look at that Vito website. I mean, if there's more there than Guy said, and I'm sure that's usually what happens at websites, it's certainly something to think about, if nothing else. And I do feel, I mentioned it before, I think a lot of people do want to get involved, but they don't really know where to turn, right? This sounds like a pretty good alternative. So, and remember, we're not letting Brian join. So don't worry about that, America. It will be a Brian-less organization.
Okay. See y'all.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
If this thing works.
Well, you're running it. I doubt if it will.